Continue with the recording. Welcome to the December 10th Sandag Public Safety Meeting. Before we get started, I'd like to ask our interpreter to be introduced and walk us through how to access our interpretation services for today's meeting.
Good afternoon, Chair Sotelo Solis. I will begin with the instructions in Spanish and I will be back with the instructions in English immediately afterwards. Muy buenas tardes y bienvenidos, bienvenidas a esta sesión del Comité de Seguridad de la Asociación de Gobiernos de San Diego. Se está ofreciendo servicio de interpretación simultánea. Para hacer uso del mismo, solo es necesario desplazarse a la barra inferior de controles en Zoom. Ahí deben ver un icono de interpretación, parece un globo terráqueo, y de ahí seleccionarían Spanish o español. Si están utilizando la aplicación móvil de Zoom en celular, tableta, etcétera, presionen primero los puntos suspensivos, luego interpretación y luego el idioma. Por último, si no desean escuchar el audio original en inglés en el fondo, por favor seleccionen Mute Original Audio o silenciar audio original. Once again, we do have simultaneous interpretation available. In the event that there are any comments in Spanish, we invite our English speakers to also use the feature. To do so, please scroll down to the bottom of the Zoom screen where your meeting controls are. Then click on the interpretation icon. It looks like a little world, and then select English as your language. If you are joining through the Zoom mobile app on a cell phone, tablet, or other mobile device, first press the ellipsis, the three dots, then interpretation, and then choose your language. Finally, click on mute original audio to not hear the original Spanish flow in the background. Gracias, and thank you, Chair.
Gracias, Carlos. With that, if you could all join me in the Pledge of Allegiance, please place your right hand over your heart. Ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you all. Before we jump into the meeting, I'll again ask our clerk to confirm that we have quorum. Sylvia?
Yes, Chair. I can confirm that we do have a quorum.
Outstanding. I'd like to remind everyone of our process for both member and public comments. Members are asked to use the raise hand feature on the Zoom toolbar and turn on their cameras when they have a comment or question, and I'll go ahead and recognize you. If you are a member of the public and would like to speak on an item, please raise your hand by hitting the raise hand icon on the Zoom toolbar once we reach that item on the agenda. And if you're calling into the meeting, please press *9 on your phone if you'd like to comment on an item. All comments, whether emailed or live, will be made part of today's record. With that, let's start with item 1, the approval of meeting minutes. If a member of the public would like to make a comment, please raise your hand now. If there are any PSC members' comments, please turn on your camera as well. Seeing none, I'd like to seek a motion to approve the minutes.
Chair, this is Raul Campillo. I'll make the motion.
I have a motion from Mr. Campillo. Do I hear a second?
Musgrove, second.
Second, Musgrove, second. All those, okay. We do have a motion and a second. We'll now call the roll.
For the Chiefs Association, seat 1, Chief Ed Barso.
Barso, aye.
For the Chiefs Association, seat 2, Chief Fred Armijo. For the City of San Diego, Raul Campillo.
I vote yes.
For the County of San Diego, Supervisor Joel Anderson. It doesn't seem like he's present. And I will mark that absent, County of San Diego. For District Attorney, Commander Barbara Retzel.
Aye.
Thank you. For East County, both East County members are absent today. East County is absent.
Sylvie, we have, I believe, Councilmember Musgrove's here. Sorry, no, I'm thinking north, sorry, but we do have Chief Ormejo is available and on a panelist now.
Yes. I'm gonna go back. Chiefs Association 2.
I vote aye.
Thank you. Thank you. For the County of San Diego, I said they're absent. East County is also absent. For the Fire Emergency Medical Services, Chief Rick Boyd.
Chief vote aye.
County of San Diego is here, and I vote aye.
Thank you. For North County Coastal, that would be Ed Musgrove.
I'm inland, but I'm not sure if we have somebody from coastal.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
For North County Inland, that would be Ed Musgrove. Thank you.
And I'm still a yes, thank you.
I apologize. I'm following the.
Not at all, not at all.
Not my notes. For the San Diego Police Department, that would be Assistant Chief Paul Conley.
Paul Conley's aye.
Yes, thank you. For the Sheriff's Department, they are absent today. And for the South County Chair, Alejandra Sotelo Solis.
Sotelo Solis, yes.
Thank you. The item passes.
Thank you so much. We now move on to item 2 on our agenda today. Is public member comments regarding any issues not on today's agenda. So if a member of the public would like to comment, please raise your hand. And also too, if you'd like to unmute yourself, please hit *9. Ms. Clerk, do we have anyone who would like to address us on any of the items not on the agenda?
No, Chair, we do not have anyone.
Okay, seeing no further comments. Actually, before I do that, are there any members of the committee that would like to share any comments? Okay, seeing none, we'll now go on to item 3 is the Chief Executive Officer's report. Jim Lithica will be giving us the report in place of Hassan. Jim,
Yes,
you're up.
yes, thank you very much, Chair. This is Friday, and Fridays at Sandag are always very exciting. And today's no different. In fact, there's 2 significant events that happened today, too. And let me go to the first one, which is probably the most important one. Member of your Sandag staff, Sandy Keaton, is retiring today. Sandy, turn on your where are you? Turn on your camera. There she is. Sandy's been our criminal justice manager, and she's retiring at the end of this month after more than 20 years working for Sandag. And I can tell you, her energy and her commitment are unmatched. She's a native San Diegan, and early on in her career, she worked to help women who were without housing. And at that time, she was working for the County of San Diego, what was then called the Alcohol and Drug Services. Did I get that right, Sandy?
Florida. I was at
Florida.
Alcohol and Drug Services. Before that, I was with Catholic Charities.
All right. Okay. And then at Sandag, Sandy's been a significant contributor to our criminal justice division's research, including efforts related to reducing ethnic disparity, reinvigorating communities through something called Promise Neighborhoods efforts, and facilitating alternatives to detention for youth. So I just want to, if you could all join me in wishing her well and thanking her for over 20 years of contributions to Sandag. So thank you, Sandy.
Oh, thank you very much, Jim. I appreciate it. I'm going to miss Sandag immensely. It's been an incredible experience here. So
Like, what are you going to do with your Fridays?
Well, actually, I'm taking another position at South Bay Community Services. So I'm going back to nonprofit and going to be working with youth prevention, family interventions. I kind of want to end my career in a nonprofit world following those missions. So yeah, it's kind of, it just seems like a natural fit. So I'll be working those Fridays.
But there was also a second event that some of you, including our chair, might have heard about. And that second big event was the board passed the 2021 regional plan after quite a few years of analysis, public engagement, and research. This plan, as you probably heard us say many times, builds a transportation system that's faster, fairer, and cleaner, ones that more than ever before. So we're really proud of the plan, and we want to sincerely thank everybody that provided input throughout this entire multi-year effort. And finally, just a few weeks ago, we celebrated the grand opening of the largest transportation project ever built in this region, the Mid-Coast extension of the Blue Line. The grand opening had attracted more than 8,500 attendees, and it was like any other I've ever attended, and I've attended a bunch of them. And we have good reason to celebrate that. It's a $2.2 billion job. The Mid-Coast extension was completed on time and under budget. We can do jobs like this. Connects people and places and communities and opportunities. And that's exactly what the 2021 regional plan that we just passed this morning is all about. And that's exactly what Mid-Coast does. Chair Sotelo-Solis, that concludes my report.
Well, he left out one other very special retirement, and it is his own. Mr. Lithicum is also retiring after, I believe it was 37 years? No.
42.
42 years serving both the public and, actually you said yours was all public, or am I getting it reversed? All public sector
Caltrans,
service.
MTDB, and Sandag.
So, and Jim was also very, very instrumental with the Mid-Coast Trolley Blue Line extension. So we give our heartfelt thanks to both of you for your commitment to public service and to being servants of the public, because we know that as elected officials and public servants, at times it's a very thankless job. There's a lot of hours that you put in that people don't even know about, research and reports that we read and do, but you help us implement it, and you make us as the elected officials look real good. So thank you for all of your service. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
Bueno, well, felicidades, and on to the rest of the meeting. So now, are there any members of the public wishing to address us on this item?
Chair, I don't see any members of the public.
Outstanding. We now move on to item 4. It's Chief Barstow presenting on item 4.
Good afternoon. So short report this month. The Chief Sheriff's Management Committee met on Wednesday, December 1st. We had a presentation by Amaraj of Argis, and he presented a proposal by the Argis Business Work that will allow contributing agencies to narrative information from our police reports with fellow agencies. And this policy allows us to have agency level control over what we share and our ability to pull back information if it needs to be pulled back for one reason or another. And our Chief Sheriff Management Committee voted to approve that policy going forward. Other than that, our next meeting is currently scheduled for January 5th at 9:45, and that's the end of my report.
Okay, great. Are there any members of the public wishing to address us on this item?
Chair, there are no members of the public.
Okay, any members of the committee like to provide any comments? Not everybody at the same time. Okay, we'll now move on to item 5. Chief Vogt, you're on.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. So another brief report. In November, the county fire chiefs had a 2-day strategic planning meeting. It was very productive, and we intend to have a final 5-year strategic plan by February. And in December, there was no meeting. End of report.
Oh, nice, quick, simple. I like it. Any questions or comments from members of the public? Any comments from the members of the committee? Seeing none, good luck on the strategic plan there, Chief Vogt. All right, moving on. We now go on to the Argus Director, Eric Wood, who will be providing a brief introduction on this item, and then Ken Amridge, who will continue to present on item 6. Take it away.
Thank you. Good afternoon, committee members. My name is Eric Wood. I am the Director of Argus Division of SANDAG. One of Argus's responsibilities is to develop acceptable use policies for our systems with regional input from a cross-sectional team across the region. It is my pleasure to have Ken Amridge present this item today, and he is the Business and Operations Manager for Argus. And he was the leading force behind this regional effort to draw this draft policy together and get it to this point where we are today. Ken, would you go ahead and present this item?
Yes, thank you, Eric. Good afternoon, members of the committee, Chair Solis, and members of the public. Next slide, please. So first and foremost, you may be wondering, what is the officer notification system? Well, it's a computer application that is currently maintained by the Argus Division of SANDAG, originally written by the San Diego Police Department perhaps 20 to 30 years ago. The way the system works is authorized users in public safety in the region within the Argus umbrella, if you will, can enter data into this system about a particular person, location, or vehicle. And it's the Argus user, when they create this record, they put in a request to be contacted about that record if someone else within the region encounters it. For instance, if a suspected, a registered sex offender is contacted in one jurisdiction and that person is registered in another jurisdiction, it allows that free exchange of information between investigators. The other point about ONS records is that it allows users to receive an automatic text or email if another agency contacts them. So even if they don't get that phone call or contact from the other user, they still get the information through that automated text and other related record. Next slide, please. So a little bit about the work that went into the development of this. So Argus was directed through its annual work plan, both in 2020 and 2021, to work on this policy in collaboration, in coordination with the rewrite of our software application for the program. And we developed that policy, we vetted it through various stages, which you'll see shortly, and presented it. So we've complied with our directives to serve the region. We formed an 8-member task force to work with this as part of our MOU. We're required to work with those agencies and get agency input, and they were invaluable in the development of our policy draft for you. Next slide, please. So the Business Working Group reviewed its first draft earlier this year in May. The following month, we did some revisions to our policy, and it went through another more detailed review, and it was forwarded on for legal review with agencies, including San Diego Police Department's legal counsel. Secondly, it went to the Seconds in Command group. That's seconds in command within the area law enforcement groups for further review and feedback. We reviewed that feedback, incorporated into the policy, and the legal review was completed by San Diego Police Department the following month. And then most recently in October of 2021, this was presented to the Chiefs and Sheriffs Management Committee, who have recommended it to the Public Safety Committee here. Next slide, please. Thank you. So key points about our policy that we want you to be aware of is that the records that the officers and law enforcement personnel in the region are reviewing are advisory in nature. The policy doesn't give the basis for arrest. It's merely a conduit for them to then reach out to that other agency or even a member of their own agency who entered that record to find out more about the status of a person, location, or vehicle. The purpose of the system is to alert fellow law enforcement about that record and anything of whether it's officer safety related or otherwise. And that will enhance not only safety of the officer contacting that subject record, but also the safety of the public involved as well. Thirdly, the next point I wanted to make is that it clarified responsibilities. So the agencies are clearly responsible for the data that's entered and setting the appropriate retention time, how long that record stays in the system. And ARGIS and SANDAG ARGIS, we're responsible for ensuring that these records are removed from the system promptly and the system functions exactly as it's designated by the user. The ACCs, I'll spell out that acronym, is an Agency Clearance Coordinator. They grant the appropriate level of use of access to the system in accordance with that user's needs within the criminal justice system in the region. Also, we only include limited information about that subject record in the record itself in the remarks section, just enough to take appropriate action, which is typically to call an investigator and find out more about what the record pertains to. And then lastly, there's very careful and well-dictated guidelines for misuse, as well as very detailed audit capabilities, which give us the ability to audit every single user action to ensure that it's used properly and in accordance with state and federal guidelines. Next slide, please. One addition to our policy, which is awaiting approval through this process, was the addition of a threat assessment subtype. In January of 2020, a detective with the San Diego Law Enforcement Coordination Center's TIP lead unit proposed a new subtype. And this subtype deals with subjects who are being investigated for threats of violence, such as school shootings, which sadly is all too common in the news these days across the United States, and also threats towards elected officials, judges, and even law enforcement. That subtype would set out a more specific, how should I say, designation so that someone encountering that subject in the field, for instance, would recognize that the person here may be under investigation, or is under investigation, I should say, for a potentially serious crime. So that will help to communicate and ensure communicate better between agencies and ensure the safety in the region. So after a review by our business working group and San Diego Police Department's legal counsel, it was unanimously approved and being presented now in our policy draft. Next slide, please. So the Public Safety Committee is asked to recommend that the SANDAG Board of Directors approve this officer notification system policy. And with that, if there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Great, thank you again so much. Appreciate that. Are there any questions from members of the public on this item?
No, Chair, there are no comments from the members of the public.
Thank you so much. Any of the PSC members? Seeing none, I appreciate the information. And again, this is for
Chair.
action. Go ahead.
Chair, I apologize, SANDAG production. I'm not sure the clerk saw, there is a public hand raised, so I have my timer up for you.
Okay, great. Go ahead and allow that member of the public in.
Thank you so much, Chair and Committee. This is Dr. Tim Bilash. I'm up in Del Mar. Thank you for that report. I have a question about anticipation of changes to the technology or needed funding over the next 5 to 10 years for these kind of programs.
Go ahead and give us your comment and include in that your questions. And we want to make sure that you have.
Right. I just wanted to raise the issue of whether there'll be a need for increased funding to get connectivity or changes in technology to update or keep these systems running over the next 5 to 10 years. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. Ken, do you think you could answer that about funding and the change of resources, or Eric, either one?
Yeah, I can try to take that. So this system it's actually been in place for quite some time. And what the recent request was to build an acceptable use policy that had simply not created before. So that all there really is going on in terms of expense is the maintenance of the system. There's no forecasted growth or expansion of the program, just continued use. This use is funded by agency fees that each of the member agencies contribute. But there's other than standard maintenance, patching, things of that nature to keep it compliant with regulations, there's no increased expense currently in the forecast.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for the clarification, and thank you to the member of the public who did ask the question. Any comments again from members of the committee? Seeing none, this was for information only. I want to thank Director Wood and Ken for coming in and sharing this information with us.
This was for action.
Actually,
correct?
yeah,
This is for
recommendation.
item 6. Okay,
Yes.
I have it for information only, but I will go ahead and ask for a motion on the floor to recommend that the
So
board.
moved.
And who was that?
Anderson,
Member
Campio.
Anderson.
County.
Member Anderson.
Campio
you got a
will
motion.
second. And Campio will
Uh,
second. Thank staff for presentation as well. Sorry, Chair.
Okay, Campillo seconds it. Any other discussion? Seeing none, please call the roll.
For South County, Chair Sotelo Solis.
Sotelo Solis, aye.
For County of San Diego, Supervisor Joel Anderson.
Aye.
For City of San Diego, Honorable Raul Campillo.
Campio, yes.
For East County is absent. For North County Coastal, Honorable Keith Blackburn. It seems like he's absent, so I will note that as a no, absent for North County. For North County Inland, Honorable Ed Musgrove.
Musgrove, aye.
For County Chiefs Sheriff's Association, Chief Ed Barso.
Varso, aye.
For County Chiefs Sheriff's Association, Chief Fred Armijo.
Armijo, aye.
For Regional Fire Emergency Medical Services, Chief Rick Bort.
Chief Boat, aye.
For San Diego County District Attorney, Commander Barbara Retzel.
Ridicel, aye.
Thank you. San Diego County Sheriff's is absent. For San Diego Police Department, Assistant Chief Paul Connolly.
Connolly, aye.
Thank you. And that's all. The item passes.
Outstanding. Thank you again. We now move on to item 7, and that is a presentation by Dr. Cindy Burke, Director of Research and Project Management. Go ahead.
Hi, thank you, everybody. Our report on arrest statistics, and we actually combined 2 years because we were unable to get data from the state, recently came out. There is a link in the agenda, both to a CJ Flash as well as the report overall. You can go to the next slide. The arrest data that we share complements the UCR crime statistics. It includes a greater amount of crime, and it also enables us to look at some of the characteristics of the individuals who are arrested across the San Diego region, including by gender, by age, as well as ethnicity. It's important to realize that we should not compare arrest data to crime data. A crime could occur in 1 year. The arrest could be made at a much later period of time. It's also possible that a crime could occur in one jurisdiction and an arrest could be made in another jurisdiction. Because we were unable to get the data from the state for 2 years in a row, which had been our primary source, we were very grateful for ARGIS and our member agencies who shared their data with us here. But because we were doing it in a different way, we only have data for 7 years compared to the longer comparison years we had before. It is a snapshot in time. If you see statistics from some of the agencies, as crime information is updated, information could be changed over time. So this reflects the data that was obtained at the period of time that we could get it. And also us trying to do our best to replicate the data systems that the state had before. So again, there's always, when you start manipulating data and putting it into categories, when there's a number of different penal codes, a number of different ways that it could be looked at. So we wanted to have all those disclaimers out there. Next slide, please. So the primary questions we looked at was, how did arrest change in 2020 compared to 2019? Obviously, there's been a lot of attention of how has the pandemic and COVID affected both public safety as well as other aspects of our community and living situation. How do arrest rates vary by jurisdictions? Prop 47 changed how property and drug crimes were categorized. Crimes that previously could have been wobblers, meaning they could be a felony or misdemeanor, were now misdemeanors. So we looked at some variation over time in that in our analysis. And also how do we look at a lot of attention on disparity, equity in the region, and also looking at how do arrest rates vary in the county by ethnicity. Next slide, please. So COVID is obviously one of the biggest drivers of the data that you're going to see in these slides, with less opportunity for some crimes. For example, when businesses weren't open, shoplifting might be less harder to occur, but burglaries could be more likely to occur. Public safety policies to promote social distancing. We know there's a lot of zero bail. Law enforcement may have had to make choices if something was not a serious violent offense, whether to engage in an individual, especially right during that stay-home order. Challenges of providing services in person to individuals. We evaluate a number of programs and know that when they had to pivot to telehealth services, especially to individuals and populations that may not even have broadband services or devices to get services electronically, what were the long-term impacts of that? I know that the Surgeon General just came out talking about young people and the long-term mental health impacts of the pandemic. It's possible that crimes weren't reported to law enforcement, so they would not be making arrests, for example, with mandated reporters with domestic violence or child abuse. And again, with a lot of discussion about proactive policing, again, going back to the social distancing. Next slide, please. So for the 7 years of data, you can see the burgundy line are the adult arrest rates in the San Diego region. The yellow-orange lines are juvenile rates. And we had both of those rates were at their 7-year low. That is the number of arrests that were made per population in the region. It was a 31% decrease from the 2019 rate for adults to the 23.8 per 1,000 population rate in 2020, and the juvenile rate dropped from 9.8 to 6.9. That was a 30% decrease. So both double-digit decreases. Next slide, please. Looking at how many arrests total were made across the San Diego region per day on average in 2016, which was 5 years ago, 2019 and 2020. You can see in 2016, there were average of 287 arrests made per day. To 246 in 2019, and then big drop that to 169 in 2020. Next slide, please. Looking at crimes by type, this is what I would have expected to see. There were decreases in all of the five crime types we looked at, including violent property, alcohol, drug, weapons, and other. But as one would expect, violent crime is the crime when we want law enforcement to be as proactive as possible, especially when we know of increased ghost guns on the street and homicide numbers increasing across the country. So those arrests dropped only by 11%. You could see that in 2020, there was 34 arrests for violent offenses made on average per day. The biggest drops were in those other offenses that could be different types of failure to appear, not complying with supervision, other types of offenses in that category, followed by alcohol, drug, which dropped from 75 per day to 55 per day in 2020. Next slide, please. This slide shows felony and misdemeanor arrest rates since 2014 to 2015. Prop 47, which I described before, was when a number of offenses changed from felonies to misdemeanors. Went into effect at the very end in November of 2014. So you can see in 2015, as would be expected when there were fewer misdemeanors and a greater number of misdemeanors, the misdemeanor arrest rate increased from 22.3 to 30.1. The felony rate dropped slightly. But what I think is interesting is, again, the bigger drop that we see from 2019 to 2020 for both felonies and misdemeanors, but how misdemeanor arrests have gone down since 2015 to 2020. Obviously, this is these stats, I can't say anything about causality, but some possibilities are that there actually are fewer crimes being committed. And so that's why there's fewer misdemeanor arrests over time. It could be possible that individuals aren't reporting crimes to police. And it's also possible that police are witnessing behavior and then not making an arrest in the field. But I do think that continued decrease in misdemeanor arrest over time is an interesting phenomenon. And at the end of the presentation, if we have time, that might be something to discuss. Next slide, please. The arrest rates did vary by jurisdiction. The law enforcement jurisdictions are labeled in alphabetical order on the bottom of the axis. In 2020, you can see that the lowest arrest rate overall, this is for all of the arrest categories, was in Carlsbad that had 7.7. The highest was 33.7 in El Cajon. Next slide, please. All of the jurisdictions did have some level of decrease in their arrest rates. The smallest was Coronado that had an 11% decrease from 2019 to 2020. The largest was in the city of Del Mar, which was 55%. I think that really shows Del Mar has one of the higher crime rates, especially property, because the population is small, but people come in for the fair, for the beach, for the racetrack. And I think that that decrease really shows the smaller number of people visiting the city in 2020. Okay, my next slide is next, and that is looking at arrest rates by ethnicity. Arrest rates have declined over the past 5 and 1 years for all of our racial ethnic groups in the San Diego region. The smallest was for Black African-American individuals, which had a decline of 38% from 2019 to 2020. Whites had a decrease, I'm sorry, that's over 5 years, 46% for whites. In our arrest bulletin, we do talk about looking at African-Americans make up 5% of the region's population. They make up 16% of all arrests. And that does vary from 13% of alcohol and drug arrests to 22% of weapons offenses. It's beyond the scope of the report to go into all the reasons for this, but we do want to put the data out there for continued discussion as we look at equity and ways to improve public safety for everybody in our region. Next slide, please. And just closing, as you'll be hearing more from Arjus, Eric, Caroline, and I in 2022, arrest rates will be part of our CYBERS reporting, the new system that's replacing UCR stats. There's crime and arrest stats there, so we'll be looking to see how we can capture the data in the most effective and efficient way. Just so you know, when we come out with our crime stats in 2022, we're going to be trying to look at both the UCR and the cyber crime stats to allow comparison over time. And we're committed to continuing to work with you all and our provider historical and local regional analyses. And that is my presentation.
Great. Thank you again, Dr. Burke. I think as we look at and through that equity lens, I think to be informed with this type of reporting, I think is essential. I think it's really, really important. Okay, are there any questions or comments for members of the public there, Ms. Clerk?
Yes, Chair. We have Dr. Tim Balash.
Okay. 3 minutes.
Thank you so much for taking my comment and for a great presentation. Thank you, Dr. Burke. There are just two things I would be wondering about. I'm not that familiar with law enforcement and these issues, but is there, the thing that would come to my mind, are there relationships of arrest rates to the outcomes or the amount of community violence that is being seen over this time period? In other words, are different practices helping or not helping? And arrests versus incidents, are the officers interacting with the community in other ways? Does that make a difference?
Thank you so much.
I'd love to have, if any of our law enforcement partners are on the phone and would like to speak with us since they're in the field. I know there's probably variation across the, in our report, we talk about some of the different factors. And I think that especially there's been a lot of factors. 2020 was an unusual year. So I think that a number of combinations of factors could go in there. But if any of the individuals who are really out there would like to speak, I see Chief Barso just turned his camera on.
Go ahead, Chief.
Yeah, I do believe it's an interesting question. I don't know if I could say that we have solid research that really shows one way or another. We goes without saying though that we've seen over the last almost year and a half, 2 years now, following the pandemic, following some of the social unrest after the murder of George Floyd, that law enforcement has been engaged in our region a lot in having conversations about making sure that we're policing our communities and addressing crime trends, and in some cases increasing crime trends, but also trying to find a way to do such in a as equitable and more strategic of a fashion as possible, where we're not just going out into our communities with massive amounts of law enforcement presence, but also strategies to actually solve a problem and do it such in a fair way. So hopefully that kind of helps answer the question a little bit.
I think we have Chief Armijo.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. So a couple of thoughts on this. One is how much of an impact staffing has played into this when it comes to the number of arrests versus reported crimes. I can tell you that many agencies in our county are struggling with staffing. We are losing more officers than the pipeline coming in is supplying. And so when you look at the amount of activity that's going on in the field, that's having an impact. You just simply can't have the same level of productivity when you don't have as many folks out in the field taking enforcement action in one way or another. The other thing that and we started some dialogue on this idea at the last Chiefs and Sheriffs meeting that I think would be more telling when it comes, especially when it comes to equity issues, is having a deeper analysis to differentiate crimes against people and property versus crimes against the state. Arguably, crimes against the state, one might say, well, that's something that an officer might initiate, versus a crime against a person or their property. They're typically initiating that by calling and reporting, and then that subsequently drives some kind of investigation and action on the part of law enforcement. And having that kind of data to see, is there a gap between those two kinds of concepts that we then need to work on when it comes to having a more equitable delivery of service by law enforcement. So I would be interested in going forward, us putting some effort into peeling back that layer a little bit. So I think that would give us more informed data for better decision making, better policy development, better training development. So I do think it's a multi-factor sort of issue that we're all kind of struggling to understand.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you both for your comments. Dr. Burke, do we have any other thoughts on this? And I will go ahead and, unless you had something, I was going to open it up to comments from the members.
Yes, please.
Any members of the committee? I appreciate Chief Barso and Chief Armijo's perspective as well.
Yeah, I just have a quick question, and I appreciate the comments from both the chiefs. Is it possible to get Dr. Burke's presentation emailed to us? Would the
Dr. Burke
do that?
Yeah, it's our PSC PowerPoint should be part of the original packet, and it should have been reposted with all of our presentations on Thursday, but I'll make sure that you get that also as an actual the PowerPoint if you'd like to have that. And we're always willing to come out to any city council meetings and present our data to council member.
Fantastic. Thank you very much.
So again, this was for information only. However, it's very, very important for all of us to have access to. And again, you can check it out on our website as well as our agenda packets. So thank you again, Dr. Burke. We now move on to item 8. And this is with Samuel Sanford, Senior Regional Planner, who will be presenting on this item.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. So switching topics a little bit, now we're going to go on to item 8, which is on traffic safety. And for the report on this item, it's on starts on page 25 of today's agenda, and the presentation is in the supporting materials starting on page 11. This is an annual item. It's come to the Public Safety Committee starting a few years ago. This is the 5th iteration of this practice of setting annual targets for the following calendar year. So this is about setting targets for 2022. It is a federal requirement from Federal Highway Administration that MPOs adopt targets. They have the option of either adopting statewide targets that are set by Caltrans or set numeric targets for our region. So those are the items for discussion today. I do want to preface this a little before I get into the details of the presentation that, we'll go over some of the data on safety in our region with the understanding that this is one piece of a larger safety picture. We're talking about setting targets today, but there's the much larger planning, engineering, encouragement, enforcement aspects that go into safety. This is just one element of a multifaceted approach to help drive down fatalities and serious injuries on our roadways. Next slide, please. So the target setting process really kicks off with Caltrans, and they set targets for the entire state on all public roads, and this is all roads that are accessible to the public regardless of ownership, regardless of maintenance responsibility. And those are set on August 31st of each year. For calendar year 2022, Caltrans evaluated data and has set targets based on trends. Essentially, they looked at the most recently available data, which is 2019, and then preceding that, found what those trends are, and then set targets based on that. So in this context, targets are really the anticipated outcome. It's not a term that we would often use in other contexts where it's the desired end state. For this purposes, as defined by the federal rule, a target is what evidence or trends show we expect to see on the roadways in the following year. So SANDAG, as I mentioned, is required to set targets by the end of February, either supporting the statewide targets or setting numeric regional targets. Next slide, please. These are the 5 measures for which we are required to set targets. It is the number of fatalities, followed by the rate of fatalities, which is normalized by the amount of exposure. In this case, it's used 100 million vehicle miles traveled. Then we have the number of serious injuries and the rate of serious injuries. And lastly, there's a combined measure that looks at non-motorized users. So this is going to be cyclists, pedestrians, others that are using their personal mobility device. And it's a combined of the fatalities and serious injuries of those roadway users. Next slide, please. So this table has those same performance measures on the left-hand column. The center column has the numeric targets that were set by Caltrans for calendar year 2022. You'll see that there are some decimal points. The rule requires that a 5-year rolling average is used in the calculations. The data source, the calculations are all essentially specified in the rule on how this process proceeds. On the column on the furthest right, we have the annual percent change from the preceding year. So what that is showing is essentially what Caltrans anticipates from the 2021 data to 2022, what they expect to see. So for fatalities, they expect to see a decrease in the number of fatalities on our roadways. However, for serious injuries, they anticipate seeing an increase from what they forecasted for 2021 to what they expect to see in 2022. And then the last measure is combined, so it takes those 2 trends and combines them. The next few slides, actually, we get into the data a little bit to show you kind of the analysis that SANDAG has done. And I will say that I'll cover 2 of the measures, first starting with one of the rate measures and then one of the annual measures to kind of show that analysis and staff's recommendation that we continue to support the statewide targets. So this chart shows fatality rates by VMT. So it's one of the normalized measures. The bars are the annual numbers and the lines are the 5-year rolling average. The orange yellow colors are for the San Diego region, and the blue bars or the green line are for statewide. To the right of the chart, you can see the pink diamonds. Those are past targets that were set statewide. And you can see the pink square, which is the subject of today's discussion, the target for 2022. Looking at this, we can see that the San Diego region, when we control for how much driving is occurring on our roadways, is performing well relative to statewide numbers. Throughout all the years on this chart and the 5-year rolling average, the San Diego region has a lower fatality rate by VMT than is seen throughout the rest of the state. So based on this, SANDAG staff continues to support the idea of supporting the statewide targets established by Caltrans. The logic being that if we were an outlier and we exceeded the state in any way, that we should do additional analysis and bring more resources to bear on whatever that aspect was. But in this instance, we see that the San Diego region is actually doing well relative to the state. If we advance one slide, we'll see that, I should say, for the other measures that are not rate-based, so the number of fatalities and the number of serious injuries, and then the non-motorized performance measure, we cannot do a direct comparison between the San Diego region and statewide. So what we've done is we looked at the proportion of the population. So on average, from this time period from 2011 to 2019 shown on this chart, the San Diego region is about 8.4% of the population. However, if we look at our amount of fatalities per population on the roads, it's actually much less than at 8.4%. So again, we're seeing that the San Diego region is performing well relative to the statewide numbers. Next slide, please. And here is the chart of fatalities, and this just demonstrates the challenge of comparing the San Diego region again, which is in orange and very small on this chart, compared to statewide values. It's just not a comparison that lends itself to that. That's why we use the population approach. Next slide, please. So overview on impacts. This is a requirement. Federal Highways makes a determination on if the state has made significant progress. If the state does not make significant progress, there's additional planning requirements, and that has occurred for 2 of the analysis years so far, 2018 and 2019. Essentially, Caltrans has to do a plan on how they're going to implement the Highway Safety Improvement Program, which is the major funding source for capital safety on our roadways. And there's also a requirement to use all the safety dollars for the safety program statewide. The targets are also included in the regional plan, the plan that was adopted this morning, and then also the Regional Transportation Improvement Program, essentially the CIP for transportation in our region, also has to be designed in a way that supports target achievement. Next slide, please. Before we get to that discussion slide, I did want to talk about the quick next steps. We have another policy advisory committee that we'll be going to after PSC, and then we'll go to the board in January. Part of the regional plan that was adopted this morning, one of the early implementation actions is a Vision Zero component, which can be potentially a plan, a data set, or other aspects to be determined as we go through that implementation piece. But that is one part that's a key going forward in furthering safety on our roadways. Next slide. And with this, I just want to pause and see if there's any comments or discussion on what PSC would like to see as far as SANDAG's approach to either supporting the statewide targets that were adopted by Caltrans or developing regional targets and numeric targets. We'll pause there and turn it back over to Chair. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sam. Are there any questions for staff on this item? And which one would be the priority? Just follow Caltrans or create our own? Any thoughts?
Chair, we have Dr. Tim Balash from the public that would like to comment.
Yeah, it just before we will go on to members of the public, I want to make sure that if there were any questions specifically for our presenter. But seeing none, we'll go now to the public speaker. Thank you, Sylvia.
Thank you again kindly for taking my comment. I'd be curious in these statistics whether there's an idea what fatalities involve substance use or equipment failure, like no seatbelts, and were any idea whether there were previous traffic infractions prior to the incidents for these fatalities?
Does any members of the staff want to address that question?
Sam, are you still here? I'm sorry, Chair, I'm not sure what happened to the presenter.
Oh, thank you. Okay, I'm sorry we couldn't answer the, oh, Sam, you're back on.
I have a message from oh, there he is. Were you able to answer our member of the public's question? Sam, I don't believe the data can be tracked across individuals the way it is is my understanding of the information, but I'll defer to you.
My apologies. I lost all connection and had to log back in again. So I missed, but it sounds like the crux of the question is there identifiable information in the safety data we use?
Could we ask the doctor to repeat his question for Sam so he could hear it?
Sylvia, can we let Tim back in, please?
Go ahead, Dr. Balash.
Can you hear me now? I'm sorry. Thank
Yes.
you again. I really appreciate it. The question was, I really appreciate your report. I think it's an important issue. The fatalities that were there any identifying information, whether they involve substance abuse or something like equipment failure, such as not using a seatbelt? And was there any indication whether there were previous traffic infractions prior to the incident that might have identified them at a less fatal state?
Thank you for the question. So on the first part, the data we use is SWITRS, which is a statewide integrated traffic report system or incident report system, and the FARS, which is from NHTSA, the Fatality Analysis Report System. And these have additional information regarding the incident, the parties involved, what was the preceding actions, all that is incorporated into it, but there's no information that's private information about who the individuals are themselves. So to the second part of the question on if they were involved in earlier incidents or have a history, that would not be involved in that. That would be more on the investigation side.
Thank you again, Sam, for answering that question. I really appreciate you being here and answering the question of a member of the public, for getting here quickly too, after getting kicked out. So with that, I'll kick it back to the members of our committee if they have any questions. Seeing none, this is for, we are seeking direction on this item. Looking for a motion to, if we could put the slide back up.
And if I may, Chair, this is a discussion item. So if there's any thoughts that the committee would like to share, that is wonderful. We take those in. It does not require a motion. However, that is always within your capacity if that's the desire of this group.
Yeah, I actually would go with the recommendation, the performance management rule 1, and that's, I believe, the Caltrans level, correct?
Yes. The statewide targets would be the Caltrans targets, yes.
Okay. Any other discussion? All right. Well, thank you again, Sam, for your presentation. We'll now go on to the last item, and I would like to ask Chief Vogt and Mike if they would be willing to hold this item over until the next meeting, or because we have, unfortunately, I have a hard stop at 3, and this is the last item, but I would like to hold it over until the next meeting, if you both are amenable to it. I don't know if our email went through or not. Mike?
This is Mike. I'll defer to Chief Vogt, but I support if you need to push to your next meeting. I'm good.
Great, thank you so much. Chief, do we get the thumbs up?
Well, that's Mike's, it's Mike's presentation. So if he's okay coming to the next meeting, then that's fine.
Outstanding. Thank you both. Really appreciate your flexibility. And with that, our next Public Safety Committee meeting is currently scheduled for Friday, January 21st at 1 p.m. Please note that the meeting will be held on the second Friday of the month due to the holiday schedule. With that, I'd like to call this meeting adjourned. Thank you so much. Have a great holiday, everyone.